Okay, today I have Tashin Collins, one of the most successful investors I know personally. And today's conversation is about his real journey behind what it takes to become a successful investor. Not just the wins and not the polished version, because we don't want that, Tashin. But we really want to talk about how you got started, where you got started, how'd you figure things out, what it took for the mistakes that you've made and the mindset that you needed and the moves. And the goal is really simple. It's just really to give people a real look on how an investor should think, how they should get started, what actions they need to take. But let's kind of take this all back from to the beginning. Like, what first got you interested in real estate investing just in general?
Believe it or not, what got me interested in real estate investing was social studies in school.
Really?
When I learned, I believe we learned somewhere between maybe sixth to eighth grade, we learned about what's called a feudalistic society back in the day. And if you were a lord of the land, you mattered, your voice mattered. And if you were not a lord of the land, you were pretty much an outcast or a peasant, or you worked on behalf of the lord of the land. And learning that in social studies taught me that if you owned assets or controlled assets, you would matter. And if you didn't control any assets, you wouldn't matter. Way before I got involved in real estate, I was always what we now call in real estate pretty much driving for dollars, and or what we call in the urban world window shopping. I would look at buildings, I would drive by and just imagine what it would be like to own that dilapidated multifamily building or that hotel or, bed and breakfast. So I would say history is what got me interested in real estate.
Wow, history. There's one thing. I went to college and I first wanted to be a history teacher. And I don't know why. I don't know why I loved history so much. I don't understand that part. So when you said that, I instantly, felt like, hey, I understand where you're coming from. So it was like history and the economics of things. Yeah, it's funny you say that because, that's exactly right, right? They, even like when you watch the movies and read the history books, it's all about the owner of the land, right? They don't really tell the story of other people. All right. Well, that's good. So how long have you been investing for now? Like, I mean, you've always wanted to do it your whole life, I would say at this point, but when did you really get deep into it?
So I started learning and by joining mentorships and communities and things like that in about 2019, 2018, 2019, I started joining communities and mentorships. And I had a complex where I thought if I just joined the community or swipe my credit card, that my life would change. I'm here to tell you it takes more than just buying the course. It takes more than showing up to the 1-day event that turns into a 3-day event that turns into them selling you a mentorship. You actually have to do the work. So I started going through courses and things like that. I'd say probably 2019. I actually did my first real estate deal, or I should say closed my first real estate deal November of 2023.
Okay. Well, that's funny because you say that because we're going into a little bit of a mindset talk because when sometimes we can get into imposter syndrome, right? Where it's like,
Amen.
oh, do I know enough? If I'm not ready, is this, that? Like, even I have that fear even today. There's some moves that I want to make in real estate and I'm just like, I'm kind of scared. What do I need to do? And who do I need to learn from again? Right. And you get into this vicious cycle of like another mentor or another different strategy and another this. And it's like, man, you're 3 years down the road. You're $25,000 in the hole and you still haven't made your first deal. So it's good that you took action. What do you feel like, what helped you get there? Like how does someone who has like that feeling of imposter syndrome or need like that person who's afraid to take the action, what did you do to kind of like
I mean,
take
it
that
really
first step?
boils down to mindset, I would say. You've got to really hold yourself accountable. And then outside of holding yourself accountable, you've got to have what we call an accountability buddy, somebody else that's doing more than you, that has already gone through what it is that you're trying to go through to hold you accountable. Because the people that are doing less than you are always going to tell you you're doing too much. But the people that are doing more than you are always going to tell you you're not doing enough.
Oh my gosh, that's wisdom right there. If there's a clip that comes out of this, it's that piece right there. Cause that is so, there's so much knowledge behind that. Because for me, sometimes I do feel like I'm on an island by myself. Right. And, and I think maybe that's part of that community that you're talking about, right? Cause those masterminds, you build relationships out of those. You inject yourself in that community. And we're a part of a community, and I see you in there all the time, asking questions, answering questions, helping people along the way. So I think if that's a big piece of your success, that is so important that people kind of plug in somewhere. Now, if someone's trying to plug in, especially if they're, I'm sure there's different levels. Where would you, recommend, how does someone get involved in those types of things to help find that accountability partner if someone doesn't have one?
I would say you need to get into a community of people that are actually doing the thing. We do have communities that we're a part of. We have free calls and things like that. We'll make sure that when this gets posted, that we add a link to the description that'll allow you to join one of the communities that we're a part of called Alchemist Nation.
Yeah.
Which will give you access to be able to get into a community that has a bunch of free resources with a bunch of people that are on many different levels, from new beginners all the way to people that own hotels and apartment buildings and have done everything in between.
Nice. Well, let's talk about your first deal, man. Like you said, you closed your first deal. I think you said, was it 23? You started in 19,
Yes.
23 or 22?
Yeah.
All right. So let's
November
talk about your first
November
deal.
22nd. November 22nd of 2023. Actually, believe it or not, the deal came from me joining one of the communities that I joined. Had a friend of mine who was in the military, who had him and his wife had bought a property in Lawton, Oklahoma, and they were being relocated from Oklahoma to Georgia. They had bought the property in 2021 at the height of the market with the low interest rate, but they overpaid for the property. After COVID and the interest rates went up, as you know, when interest rates are higher, the property values tend to come down. When interest rates are lower, the property values skyrocket. So they had, I believe, a 2 or 3% interest rate at the time. But the property value from 2021 had dropped about $1,000. So they couldn't sell it on the market because their mortgage was $20,000 more than what the property was actually worth, meaning they would have had to bring money to the table to sell the asset. So they would have had to pay closing costs, agent commissions, and cover the $20,000 deficit. So they couldn't sell it on the market. So we did what we call creative financing, where we purchased the property subject to the existing mortgage lien, and we left their mortgage in place. We put that property under contract. I brought in another agent who was from the area because I was actually in Buffalo, New York when this happened. Their property was in Oklahoma. I never seen the property, never stepped foot in the property, never went to Oklahoma, anything like that. I simply just reached out to an agent, said, hey, I've got this creative deal. This is, the terms of the deal. Here's their mortgage statement. Here's their monthly payment. Here's the payoff. All of these things. They weren't in foreclosure, weren't behind. They just had a negative equity deal. That agent brought a buyer to the table. And believe it or not, there was, between myself, the agent, and a couple other positions like transaction coordinator and all the other things that you need to get a deal done, 7 people ended up getting paid on that deal.
Oh, wow.
And I made $8,800 for selling a piece of paper. And then the other $8,800 was split between the other 6 individuals that were involved in the deal, being like the agent, the person that actually brought the buyer, because I think that agent found another agent that had the buyer, transaction coordinator got paid, the title company got paid, the title attorney got paid. So there's about 7 people in total that got paid. Say 4 of the 7 people that got paid were all part of the same community.
Okay, so you didn't have to put no money down to get the deal. It sounds like this was, I mean, would you consider this like a wholesale deal then? Like, did you
Correct.
wholesale the
This was
property?
a
Okay.
This was a wholesale subject to. So I locked up, I was direct to seller. I locked up the contract, and instead of keeping the property, I sold the rights to the contract to the end buyer, which is a wholesale transaction.
Okay, great. Now, what happened with your friend? Like, his property was, negative. Like, did he still have to come out of pocket to close
Nope.
or?
He didn't come out of pocket. He was able to relocate. I want to say we actually gave him $1,000 at the closing table. So he made $1,000.
Yeah.
And he was able to move into a new home with his wife and children when they got relocated to Georgia. And he didn't have to lift a finger. He didn't have to do anything. He didn't have to have any showings and people coming in and taking pictures and doing all the things that you traditionally do on the market. He just had to sign some closing documents, and we actually had a mobile notary come to him and his wife for them to sign the documents, so they didn't even have to show up to an attorney's office.
You had some time between when you first started and your first deal, and I'm sure, because this happened with me, right? When you get that first deal done, it's like a rush of emotions and feelings, and you are, you secured your place and say, I could do this. It became
Amen.
real, right?
Yeah.
Like you were like, this
Yeah.
is real. Like it took you a few years to kind of find your way and listen and mastermind and whatever you're paying the courses. And finally, when you get that first deal, like it becomes so real that, what happened? Okay, so you close your first deal with your friend, you help him. That was great. How did the next few months look for you after that as you finished?
So I closed that deal November 22nd. By December 3rd, I bought my next deal, and I actually, instead of wholesaling that deal, I bought it and I owned it, and I brought in a private money lender. This was a subject to deal as well. All I've done primarily is subject to deals because I also own a foreclosure business where I identify people that may be struggling with their mortgage lenders and can't stay afloat with the mortgage. Instead of letting them get foreclosed on, I come in and provide foreclosure relief. So my next deal, we ended up closing 2 days before Christmas, December 3rd of 2023. So it was literally a month and 1 day from my first deal. This was a single family property, 3-bed, 2-bath, 1,700 square feet. Property owner was $30,000 behind on their mortgage, and they had a 3.1 interest rate with a monthly mortgage payment of $600 a month. On the property. They had gone through some issues and were previously in a bankruptcy, so the bank couldn't foreclose on them for about 4 years. Once they came out of that bankruptcy, the bank immediately pursued foreclosure. We were able to stop the foreclosure. I brought in a private money partner, meaning I brought the contract, somebody else brought the money. The individual that brought the money brought $50,000 to the table. That $50,000 covered the $30,000 that was behind. We reinstated that so we could keep the 3.2 interest rate. They gave the seller $5,000 at closing, and they paid all of the closing cost. The seller actually netted $20,000 from us altogether. We gave them $5,000 at closing, and then we gave them $250 a month for 22 months. And then when we sold 22 months later, we gave them a balloon payment of $12,000.
Wow, that's nice. And for someone in that situation, they're ecstatic, right? Because they're about to lose their home, and they have an opportunity not only not to lose their home, but have the ability to even make some money off of the deal to help them leverage whatever the next steps are. That you're doing a nice service.
We gave them $5,000 at the closing table. We paid for 12 months of free credit repair for them through one of our partners. So we were able to get all the missed payments and stuff removed off of their credit. Every time that we made a mortgage payment for 22 months, it reported as an on-time payment on their
Nice.
credit profile for 22 months. And then 22 months later, they got a balloon payment of 12,000. For us, we got into a property without having to use our credit, without having to use pay stubs, without having to use tax returns,
Yeah.
without having to go through the bank and have any red tape. And we just bought the property and left the mortgage lien in place. So we didn't even have to do what most people would call a loan assumption, where you still have to qualify to take over that mortgage. We just transferred the deed into our LLC and we kept their mortgage lien in place, and we were able to continue paying that mortgage. The guy that brought 50,000, he made $600 a month because we ended up renting the property out for $2,000 a month. So he made $600 a month for 22 months. After the 22 months was over, when we sold, he got not only his 50,000 back that he put in, but he got an additional $50,000. He made his 50 that he put in. He made another 50,000. And me, as the guy who just got the contract and held on, because I had 50% ownership when we sold. This was actually October of last year. We sold, I want to say October 13th of 2025. I made $48,000 at the closing table, and I was paid $500 a month for 22 months while I held the property, and I also lived in the property for 12 months. So I house hacked. I made $500 a month. Plus at the closing table, I made an additional $48,000. And I never put a single dollar of my own money into the deal.
I mean, that's how you do it. That's how you do it. So let me ask you this, these first couple deals, clearly you learned a lot, but if there was one thing that you can pull out of it and say, hey, look, I wish I would have known this one thing before getting into this deal or that type of deal, what, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about if it's a mistake that you made or something you could have avoided. What out of the first few, what do you think that was?
One of the biggest mistakes that I realize actually now that I made is the property that I sold and made 48,000 on. I should have never sold it. I sold it to a best friend of mine. He ended up buying it for 246,000 with a mortgage on the property, but I had agreed to him prior to the sale 2 years before. When we bought it, I agreed that I would sell it to him in 2 years. What I realized in hindsight is I should not have sold the property. I should have got on the phone with somebody like Michael Gabriel, and I should have done a refinance on the property.
There you go.
Refinanced into today's interest rates, pulled all the equity out of the deal, tax-free, not had to pay any taxes, not had any capital gains on my taxes when I filed taxes, and the money would have been considered debt instead of income because it was a refinance and I had cash out from the refinance. So I would have been better off on my taxes. I still would have owned the property right now, still would have been getting mortgage pay down, and somebody else would have been paying that mortgage, and I would have had another asset, which would have added another 200,000 to the assets that I own. So what it took me from owning 600,000 in assets to owning 800,000 in assets, and I would have been well on my way to my $1 million in assets.
Nice. So is that your kind of strategy today, is like, hey, I'm buying and holding now instead of doing like a quick flip or a quick wholesale? That's smart. I think there's another person in our community. I think he talked about how he's done like 300 flips. And he said the only thing that he wish he would have done differently is instead of selling them, he would have just held on to them, because he would have 300 doors right now. And then you think about that, like, yeah, that's one hell of a cash flow, coming in with 300 doors.
100%. I mean, when you come from urban communities or poverty stricken communities, we need to hold on to assets. You heard me say my first deal, I wholesaled and I made that $8,800. But the buyer that made that deal still to this, or that bought that deal still to this day is making monthly cash flow every single month, as long as they're doing the right thing with that property. And now with some of the strategies I learned, I'm actually taking my single families and what I'm doing is contracting with prison systems in different states for people that are eligible for parole and probation, and having them released into our care, because our prison system right now has 1.6 million people that are eligible for parole and probation and simply are remaining incarcerated because they don't have an address, because they burned all the
Wow.
bridges with the people in the free world. We are getting, I believe, between 2.4 to 2.6 million people in America currently. More than 50% of them are eligible to be released and simply don't have an address. So if I would have been held all 13 properties that I've bought in the last 3 years, I would have been able to house more people, get more people released from prison, and teach more people the financial literacy things that I've learned over the last 5 to 6 years.
Man, I mean, this is great because, like, what I'm hearing you saying is your mission is bigger than you, right? It's not about
Amen.
you becoming a millionaire. It's not about you having all these assets and look at, I own a gazillion properties, but you are truly, which gives me chills, man. I get goosebumps thinking about like you are on a mission to change our society in general, right? Because it's not, you're saying you're not just going to help someone find a place to live after all of this, but you're actually going to teach them like how to have a place in society because, someone coming out of the corrections, it's hard. There's a stigma to that. It's hard to find a job. It's hard to, get help. They burned bridges before, so no one trusts them. Like everything you're saying is correct. Now, is there a name to that? Because I know I work with a couple of investors who work with, they call it sober living, right? So they're getting out of detox or something. Is there a name to what you're talking about?
So what we do is called reentry housing. We are working with
Okay.
people that are reintegrating into society. And then now there is a component of sober living in the reentry because they have to remain sober to be a part of our program. So it's kind of combined. Sober living only focuses mainly on people that were in rehab facilities. We are focusing on people specifically that may have come from prison. So we're able to serve a lot of different populations, women that may have been abused by their lovers and then they retaliated and now they're imprisoned,
Yeah.
veterans who had a PTSD episode and instead of getting mental help were incarcerated, senior citizens who were incarcerated because, they felt vulnerable and reacted, things of that nature. So we're able to serve a lot of different demographics inside of our reentry housing. And we don't discriminate based off your credit score, and we don't discriminate based off the fact that you have felonies on your record. The two biggest things that we see in the reentry community is regular real estate investors don't want to house anybody with a felony because that's part of the
Yeah.
screening process. And like you said, people don't want to give them jobs. So if you can't find anywhere to live and you can't find a way to make money, then why would you not go back to committing crime and having somewhere to live for free that's going to give you 3 meals and
Meals.
somewhere to
Yeah.
sleep so that you're not sleeping in the rain, which is why our re-incarceration rate is over 65%.
Yeah. I mean, so it's almost like a vicious cycle. Like you get in that whirlwind, it's almost like there's not a lot of opportunities to get out of it. It's almost like you're almost
100%.
stuck. You're almost stuck.
And, it brings me back to a Bible scripture, like you said, about it's not about owning all these assets, all these doors, doing all these things. What is a man? What is a man to gain the whole world but to lose his own soul? We could own a
Deep.
million doors. We could own 2 million doors. We could own 3 million doors. What are we doing with these assets to change the society in which we live in?
It's funny you say that only because, for me, there's, I'm in business. Of course, money always helps, right? Making money is a product of me being able to serve. But what I
Amen.
love to do is serve. And because I serve, right, I get, a receipt out of that of getting paid or whatever. But I told my wife, I said, man, the more money I make, the more I can help. Right? It's not for
Amen.
me. The more money I can help. I remember walking into church one time and I go up to the pastor and I don't want to ever boast or try to impress anybody. And I told him to the side, I said, hey, look, who can I help? And I don't want them to know it came from me, but who needs help? And he was telling me about someone who, they lost their job because of an illness and they were like, wife was, kind of like she was about to get her green card, but she couldn't drive because she didn't have her license, but she had to drive him to the hospital. And it was always like this fear of like, if you get pulled over, like you're stuck, right? All this stuff was happening for him. And they needed some money to get the green card. They needed money for rent and all this other stuff. And I was able just to give them like, bless with a big portion of money. And again, it wasn't get clout or anything because I didn't even want them knowing it was me. But it was such a great feeling to know that I was about to change someone's life in a moment because of things that I've helped other people in a way serve. So I think
And
you're
I
going to be
and
extremely blessed.
And that's amazing. One thing that I had to learn is you have to fill your cup up so that you can have something to drink, so that you have water in your cup to give somebody else something to drink. Money is a result of what we do, not the motivation behind what we do. So, money is nothing but a tool and a means of exchange. So as long as you continue to serve people, you will be served. And, in the spiritual world, we're served with blessings. And in the flesh world, we're served with, monetary gain. If we continue to serve, we'll be served. And at the end of the day, that's what we're here to do. I have a major why. A lot of times people ask me, why do I do this? I was born with cerebral palsy. I was born using a wheelchair, walker, and crutches to be able to get around. For the first 21 years of my life, I was on Social Security and in the streets, doing things I had no business doing. Thank God I never caught any felonies or anything like that on my record. At 21, I started working. I worked for about 5 years, and then I realized working for 40 hours a week for 40 years of your life to retire and get a 60% reduction in your income after working for 40 years didn't make sense to me. So I left the W-2 world. I started entrepreneurship, and it's been amazing. But I commonly tell people like why I serve people in the prison system and all the demographics I serve is because somebody getting $967 a month on Social Security can't qualify to rent an apartment anywhere in this country. So I had to do something because I was one of those statistics. I was one of the people that was making $967 monthly on food stamps and waiting on that check to come on the 3rd of the month every month, and always stressed out and always depressed and always had anxiety. And Subject to had allowed me to go from somebody that couldn't even rent an apartment on my own to somebody that owned property and was renting to other people.
Yeah, I like it. All right, awesome. Listen, I want to respect your time, but you have to leave us with I'm gonna ask you 2 questions. And these 2 questions are really to help people who like understand a strategy for 30 days. What can they do in 30 days to pick up a property? All right, so this is the scenario. You absolutely have nothing. You've lost everything. Well, not everything. You have a 650 credit score. So it's decent. It's not the best and it's not the worst. So you can get around doing something with credit. You have $1,000 in your bank account. What are your next steps in 30 days to secure a property?
So before I give you my next steps, I want to back up a little bit and tell you guys when I closed that deal that I made $8,800 on that wholesale deal. I had 3 bank accounts and each bank account was $300 in the negative. So I had $900 in the negative when I closed that deal. You do not need money to close. You don't have to have money. Someone needs money. You don't have to be the someone that has the money. So I want to make that very clear. 30-day action plan. You've got $1,000. You got a 650 credit score. What I'm focusing on is people that need to take action, not people that want to take action. So I'm focusing on pre-foreclosures. What I would do is identify the county, and I would go to the county clerk's office and I would say, I want a list of everyone who's being foreclosed on in the next 30 days because you only have 30 days. I would take that list of everyone that's being foreclosed on and I would use either Ben Verified or True People Search to skip trace those addresses. These are both two free resources. So you don't even have to pay for that. You then have to put in some time and start calling the numbers that you see on Ben Verified and True People Search. You're going to have to call. You can't make 10 phone calls and think that, oh, nobody answered. I can't do this. You're going to expect to make 1,000, maybe 2,000 phone calls in that 30 days. Keep calling till you get somebody on the phone. What you're going to offer to them is, instead of you getting foreclosed on, I can reinstate your mortgage. I can put some money in your pocket to give you cash for keys so that you can move on to the next chapter of your life. And then you're going to go under a purchase and sale contract with them. We all know what AI is. You can use ChatGPT, you can use Claude, you can use Grok, you can use one of these AIs, put an address in and say, hey, AI, I need you to create a subject to purchase contract for 123 Main Street in Columbus, Ohio, zip code 1111, and the AI will create the contract for you. Now you've got a contract. Your job is to then either wholesale that contract to an actual buyer, or what I do is I bring in a private money partner, somebody else that has the money. They bring the money to reinstate the mortgage. They bring the money for closing cost. But wait a minute, Tashin, I just did all this work and I want to make some money. I add an additional $10,000 to the purchase price as what we call an acquisition fee, so that when we close through a title company, now I get paid $10,000 for all my effort, and I retain a minimum of 50% equity in the deal because I did all the work to find the deal. Now I'm an owner of a property. I made $10,000 and I spent no money. And then when I sell the property, if it has equity, when we sell the property later down the line, whatever the profit is, I'll get 50% of that again.
Okay, and you put that all, is that all in the contract? Who makes the contract? Is the contract between you and the seller? Is it you and the buyer? Like
the original contract is between you and the seller. So you have a contract with the seller. And then when you bring in your private money partner, you need to discuss all of these terms. How much equity are they going to have? You know, how much money are they bringing to the table? This, that, and the third. And you will have a separate contract. Or if you open up an LLC and you guys go on an LLC together, you will have what's called a buyout clause in the LLC on how you can either buy that person out or what happens when you guys sell the property. And as long as you've got the equity, then you'll know that you'll make money on the sale. If you did something that had negative equity, like the first deal I did, if I would have kept that, we may have not made money on the sale, but we would have made the money on the buy with the acquisition fee for bringing in a private money partner, and then we still would have had the monthly cash flow. The beautiful thing about real estate is if you hold it long enough, it'll create its own equity through natural appreciation.
Nice. All right. So you closed on that deal. You got it in 30 days. What does the next 90 days look like for you after you secured this first deal?
Do the same thing you just did for the next 30 days and keep doing that for the next 90 days. Lock up as many deals as you can. And what does the next 180 days look like? Keep doing the same shit you've been doing for the last 90 days and don't let up on the gas. What we see happen is a lot of people make that first 10,000 and they're like, oh, I'm going to go on vacation and I'm going to go to Hawaii, Mexico. Put that money in the bank, stack that money, stack all your acquisition fees, stack everything up, put that money into a whole life insurance policy that is written by a mutually owned life insurance company that will pay you compound interest on your money so that you continue to make 4% on that money for the rest of your life. So that 10,000 will continue to make money for you without you doing anything. And every time you make an acquisition fee, you open up a new policy, you dump it in there, and eventually within 24 to 36 months, if you want to, you'll be able to retire yourself and never work again because you'll have enough policies where you're getting 4% on 10,000 on each policy. And the beautiful thing is, 30 days after opening the policy, they'll allow you to borrow against the policy to go buy more assets that are generating income for you. And you don't even have to pay that money back if you don't want to, because they take the money out of the death benefit. And the even better thing about it is they still continue to pay you the 4% on the original amount you put in, even after you pulled money out of the policy.
Love it, man. All right, listen, well, you've been a big source of information today. If someone wanted to reach out to you and ask you more questions, what's the best way to find you?
The best way to find me will be on Instagram. You can search my first and last name the way you see it on the screen here, Tashin Collins. You'll find me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is Tashin_on_humanity. I'm all about uplifting humanity, hence why my name on Instagram is Tashin on Humanity. We've got to be united. A united house cannot stand. A divided house will guaranteed be destroyed.
So I want to thank you for listening to today's episode. Hopefully you walked away with more than just motivation. Hopefully you picked up a few practical moves, some mindset shifts, and some lessons that you can take away to apply on your journey. And I want to give a big thanks to Tashin for sharing his story, what he would do in the 30 days, and real steps that would take him to do if he had to do it all over again. If you got any value out of this episode, please share it with someone who's thinking about investing or trying to get their first deal or just wants to know more about real estate. And remember, every investor has a starting point. The question is not whether you have it all figured out. The question is whether you are willing to take the next step. We'll see you on the next episode. Thank you.